All right, we're going to start our first question block with something we've been excited about for a while now, a live caller, so I can actually talk to someone back and forth. We have video on the live caller too, so if you're a YouTube listener, youtube.com/Cal Newport Media, you can actually see both of us on the screen. Our first live caller is Spyros, who has questions about lifestyle-centric career planning and concerns about falling into the second control trap with his current career that may be going too well. And because of that, it is steering him, the pressures of that are perhaps steering him away from a deeper life. All right, so let's go to our phone line and talk with Spyros. All right, we have our next caller here. Spyros, thank you for calling into the Deep Questions podcast. Now, for what I understand, you actually have a case study you want to share with us of some of the principles I talk about actually put into action.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So what I would like to do is I would like to talk about how I've been applying So Good They Can't Ignore You since I read it like a long time ago, actually. But then I feel like I kind of messed up somewhere along the way. So after I kind of summarize, I would like us to go into kind of like, where did I go wrong and where do I go from here?
Sounds good.
All right. So I moved to the US from Greece in 2012, like literally 10 years ago, to do a PhD in robotics. And I read your book a couple of years later, so in 2014. And I was like, whoa, okay, I see what I'm supposed to do. So I started applying it first to research, but then I got the opportunity to participate in the 2015 DARPA Robotics Challenge. So then I started applying the principles to robotics software as opposed to just robotics research. That went pretty well. I got really into kind of like the software side of robotics. I decided to take a leave of absence to join a robotics startup. I ended up dropping out of the PhD program with a master's. Did really well in that startup. I was the first software engineer. I hired a team eventually. Followed the startup to Austin, Texas in 2016. Then moved to San Francisco in 2017 to work for another robotics startup. Again, did really well, got promoted, got to travel to Hong Kong and China for manufacturing purposes. Mm-hmm. And now since 2018, I've been working for one of the top three, perhaps the top self-driving car company here in San Francisco. Again, I've been doing really well. I've gotten very high performance reviews. I've gotten promoted. I'm on track to get promoted again. I'm considered very reliable, high performer, all of the good stuff you would expect from somebody, following these principles. I have tons of options. I don't mean to brag, but I get so much recruiter email these days that it's almost like spam. So I do have options. Now, now this is where this is turning from a case study more to a question. I feel like to put it in terms of your book, I think I fell for the second control trap. I think I got too excited about the performance and the promotions and the compensation and the recognition that I've kind of become too busy. I have too many responsibilities. I'm too busy. My compensation is too good to ignore, if you will. Yep. So that's kind of where I would like to focus the question part.
Excellent. Well, let me first, I'm going to back you up to the beginning of your case study, just for the edification of our audience. I want to go back to you as a PhD student. You read So Good They Can't Ignore You. Now, you glossed over a little bit. Oh, I put those principles into play and started becoming very successful in my studies. Let's go back and try to make that concrete. So, can you identify what did you start doing that, let's say, other students in your cohort who weren't as successful, or you, the passwords yourself, weren't doing? Let's try to do some differential analysis here, because I'm curious in this beginning point first, and then we'll get to you now.
Yeah, for sure. I think so. Because of your own case study in the book, you were also a PhD student and eventually a postdoc, etc. I was like, I'm just going to do exactly what Cal talks about here. Cal talks about, getting a very fundamental research paper and kind of going deep into the research paper, trying to understand the proofs, trying to understand the results. So that's something that I did. I scheduled some time every week to go through either fundamental papers in my field. So I was in formal methods in robotics, which is like formal verification, formal synthesis. Anyway.
Yeah. Which, so by the way, I'm happy to geek out with you about that. We can talk about your improvers, and we would lose all of our audience. But just let you know, you should know I'm restraining myself right now. Anyways, go on.
I'm tiptoeing around it on purpose because this can be a rabbit hole. Yeah. So that's one thing that I remember very distinctly doing. Then once I got the opportunity, though, to participate in the DARPA Robotics Challenge, I was like, okay, I can apply this here as well. So then it shifted from like reading research papers as my deliberate practice, let's say, to learning C++, learning Python, which are like some fundamental languages for this kind of thing, and then something called the robot operating system, which is like a middleware for robotics applications.
Sure.
So I knew that these things existed, and I knew some programming, of course, already. But I was like, okay, these are the three fundamental things I need to know if I want to write robotic software and like get the robot to actually do something. By the way, we got to work, like my team for the DARPA Robotics Challenge got to work with those like Atlas humanoid robots from Boston Dynamics. So, pretty crazy platform to be working on.
Also terrifying, but yeah, go on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that's another way I applied that. So like I was, for example, I remember very distinctly scheduling blocks at the very beginning of my day, like before I even went into the, the grad student cubicles or whatever. Like I would, let's say, go to a coffee shop or something like that. And I would spend like, let's say 2 hours just going through tutorials, writing code, just deliberate practice.
Okay. So just to clarify for the audience, the first thing you did was it's hard to understand these fundamental papers. Having that knowledge will be useful. Quick follow-up here, because I get this question a lot. How did you actually structure the reading of hard papers without a formal forcing function? Like, I need this for a project I'm working on. You just had a system, a quota? How did you do that?
So the way I motivated myself was that, hey, I'm seeing that I'm having a hard time with like the very formal aspect of writing it. So I was able to write research papers, but they were kind of like, they weren't going very deep on the math, on the proof side of things. Yep. So I was like, okay, I'm going to motivate myself by saying that by understanding the fundamental papers and how these proofs work, I will be able to do that myself eventually. Then in terms of like how I structured that, I think it was something like, kick off a note in Evernote, pick one of these papers and then schedule time within the week. As a grad student, you have like, I kind of like reminisce about the flexibility I had in my schedule as a grad student.
I reminisce about that. Once a month, at least once a month, I have a moment where I just am insanely nostalgic for that. But anyways, go on.
Yep. And so I was, if I recall correctly, this was like 8 years ago at this point. I was scheduling time like on a weekly basis to make sure I get in at least a couple of hours. So this kind of like go over the paper. And then the other thing I was doing, which I think you also mentioned in the book, is when I was reading like papers around what I was writing, around like papers I wanted to reference, I wanted to cite in my own paper, I wouldn't just like, skim through them or read them and then forget about them on a pile. I would actually take notes, like I would take notes on the paper and digital notes, and I would kind of sketch out what this paper is trying to do and how it proves the results.
Yeah. Right. Well, okay. So just to summarize that before we jump now to the current moment, just to summarize that for the listener, what Spyros is doing here, which is straight out of So Good They Can't Ignore You, is identifying the thing that is actually valuable in the field where you are, not what you want that answer to be, not what matches how you want your day to go, but what is actually valuable. So first off, for him, that was understanding how to do this more fundamental theoretical work. And then later on, understanding how to use all the different programming language tools that are relevant to the DARPA Robotics Challenge, so I can be as useful as possible. And in both cases, what you did, which I think is right, is said, okay, that's the reality of what matters. What do I actually have to do to learn that? Oh, it's hard. I have to read these hard papers, and I'm in the same place. Theoretical computer science is the same as early in your grad student career. Understanding papers is how you advance. Understanding papers is incredibly hard. And those two things are true at the same time. And it was a big differentiating factor when I was coming up, those who would wrangle papers and those who would just look for what's easy. So I think that's a great example of the principles in action. And it worked. Okay, so it worked too well. So now we jump ahead. You're suffering from the second control trap. So for people who haven't read that book, the first control trap is trying to get a lot of autonomy in your career before you've built up the skills to actually justify it. That's where you are 23 and you quit to start your nonprofit that's going to change the world, but you don't know what you're doing. The second control trap is when you get enough leverage and skills and power into marketplace to actually have control of your career is exactly when all of the pressure in the marketplace is going to be to stay, to move up to the next level, to take the higher salary. So it's when you're most able to be autonomous is when it's hardest. And that's what you're hitting now. So why don't you explain to us a little bit more, what is your job like now? What is your day-to-day like now? Is it managerial? Is it technical? Let's get a sense of where you are.
So my title is staff software engineer. So it sounds like I'm a software engineer, like I'm writing code every day, but I'm not actually writing code every day, because at a certain level in the individual contributor, like career ladder, as we call it, you kind of like fork into different archetypes. So there is the software engineer archetype, and this is the person that like writes really good code. There is the domain expert archetype. This is the person who has like, 3 PhDs in convex optimization or, machine learning or whatever. So domain expert. And then there is the archetype that I think I better fit into, which is kind of like high-level tech lead is what we call it. And so this is the person who is able to kind of understand how the system works end-to-end and kind of, coordinate this team with this other team and this other person over here and get this, other subsystem to do the right thing. And then you get the entire project or the entire effort to do the right thing just by understanding the system end-to-end and leading the integration effort. So to put it more concretely, I do everything from, analyzing kind of like metrics to see kind of like where we have, gaps, writing project proposals, writing design documents. And then once we kind of move into the execution part of the project, I'm usually maybe I'm running some meetings or not, depending on whether we have a program manager support or not. I'm coordinating all of these different individuals, software engineers, systems engineers, test engineers, sometimes operations teams that are like, handling the self-driving cars on the road.
So what's a day look like? How much of it is Slack and email? How much of it is?
That's exactly what you hit the nail on the head. It's very much, hyperactive hive mind mode all the way. Like I have to fight really hard just to block out like 2 hours at the beginning of my day. And maybe if I'm lucky, I will actually, get to actually do deep work in those 2 hours. Like today I'm on call, for example. So like, for all I know, once my on-call, shift starts, I will be completely derailed by an issue coming in on pager duty. There is a lot of activity on Slack. I've done all sorts of little tips and tricks, applying some of the stuff from your books and your podcast to minimize that. I only check email I try to check only once a day. I once experimented with going a week without checking work email, and nothing terribly happened. So I'm very much inclined to keep doing that again. Yeah. But like email is okay. Slack is where most of the hyperactive hive mind is kind of like operating. There are lots of meetings. It got much worse, during the lockdowns. I'm sure others are saying the same. Like it's like sometimes I feel like, when am I supposed to like use the restroom and like make coffee? Like there is no time in between these meetings. Yeah,
which is absurd.
So there is a lot of that. Yeah, exactly. There is a lot of that. One of the things I talk to with my manager the most often is like, hey, we need to figure out a way for me. I need to carve out time to do proactive work as opposed to waiting for a problem to arise and then doing reactive work and then fixing the problem. Like the reactive work, part of the problem is that reactive work is actually gets recognized a lot. So there is it's really hard to motivate proactive work when there is tons of reactive work to do and it gets recognized too. So that's one challenge.
But why do you care about it being recognized?
Wow, I was not expecting that question. When I say recognized, I mean, okay, there is a recognition in terms of like performance reviews and stuff, but there is also the doing what the company, the business thinks is most, valuable, right now, this quarter, this month, this year, whatever. And it's often the case that what, the business priorities are to deal with the reactive problems. They are not to go and, do proactive work.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to give a two-part answer here, and I'm going to be terse because the second part of this answer is something that's probably going to take you weeks of actual thinking to do right. So you'll have to check back in. I'm going to give you a short-term thing to try and a long-term thing to consider. The short-term thing to try is I think this might be a good setup for a deep to shallow work ratio conversation. with your manager. So I talk about this some in deep work, but then got a lot of feedback from people after that book came out about this particular strategy working well. So it's pretty well road tested. And it's where you have a conversation like the type you're already having with your manager, but it's a little more quantitative, right? You say, okay, this is what deep work is. This is what like reactive work is. You're in a tech company in San Francisco, so they probably know the term already. And you say, what ratio of this sort of reactive shallow to deep proactive do you think is optimal for my position? Like what ratio of those two is going to produce the most value net for the organization? So we got to get a number on it. And when you have to get quantitative about it, they're not going to come back with the answer, I want you to do 100% reactive shallow, right? Because you have this other value. You have this training. You can produce new things. So when you get a number that they agree to, this often leads to the dissolving of ossification in business culture. So it let loose a lot of innovation. So they might say, okay, maybe it should be 50-50. So what we're going to do is, mornings now are for you to do proactive work. No calls start till you're not on call till the afternoon. We tell the whole team, don't expect responses. That's just an example. I don't know your exact situation. It might be, Tuesdays and Fridays, you work from not at the office and maybe from somewhere else and you're just doing proactive. The quantitative nature of that really makes a difference, and the positive orientation makes a difference. So it's you coming to your manager saying, how do I produce more for the company? Not you coming to the manager and saying, I'm fed up with you slacking me all the time. You're terrible. The latter conversation doesn't go well. The former conversation, I have report after report of that working. This, though, is a short-term solution. Try that, see how it helps. And that might be it. My long-term solution, I'm gonna ask that you probably are at a good point. And let me actually ask you, how old are you, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, I'm 34.
Okay, so you're in this sort of heart of the millennial generation, approaching middle age. It's a perfect time to start thinking through these questions of, okay, let me step back. How are things going in my life? What reconfigurations are looming on the horizon? It's a good time to go through a serious lifestyle-centric career planning exercise where you really I would look at 40 and 50 as age targets. And like we talked about on the show, have this really clear vision of all aspects of your life in an ideal world at that point. Not just work, but where you live, what you're doing with your time, who you're around, see it, smell it, taste it, we like to say. Get that vision for 40, get that vision for 50, and then look backwards and say, how do I get there? And in answering that question, you may end up saying, okay, my current career trajectory, that's fine. I just have to do this deep to shallow work ratio, maybe do a lateral move at some point into more, you could maybe figure it out. Or you might end up with an answer. You say, I have a lot of skills. I am an ML robotics expert engineer. Okay, why don't I take that out for a spin and I can actually maybe do something drastically different. I'm on contract. I work 6 months out of the year. I live on Vancouver Island. You have a lot of flexibility. So short term, I would do that ratio conversation. Long term, I would say, let's go through that exercise in detail and just see where it leads you. And don't be afraid if it leads you to, I'm more or less close, I just need to make some tweaks. Or if it leads you to, I'm about to buy a ranch outside of Austin. It could lead you in a lot of different directions and be open to all of that. How does those, as a 1-2 punch, how does that sound as a potential way forward?
I'm glad the conversation went there because I kind of anticipated this, and I've already done the first draft of what you just described, knowing that it was.
Tell us, yeah.
It could come up. Should I actually go into it?
Yeah. Okay. Give us the brief summary of the ideal lifestyle picture you're playing with.
So the brief summary is that I'm originally from Greece, right? So I wanna get to a point where I can spend more or less every summer in Greece, working, not working, doesn't really matter. Spend about 6 months out of the year in the US, and then spend another quarter, just working from somewhere else. Other things I want to be doing, I want to be able to be near the water. I love swimming, I love water sports and whatnot. So I want to be able to do that. I want to start writing. I wrote a few blog posts and articles back in grad school, and I really enjoyed that, but I gave that up later on to focus on my career. So I want to get back into writing. Maybe eventually actually write a book. We'll see about that. I want to, I'm currently single. So eventually I want to be able to meet somebody. Now I feel like I'm so busy or so exhausted that I don't even make enough time in my schedule for dating. So I definitely want to, like the connection bucket is suffering, essentially, to put it in deep life terms. Other things in there. Funny you mentioned Austin. It's actually Austin is on that roadmap because I figured that if I were to move to Austin, which is Central Time, but I work Pacific time hours, then I get 2 extra hours in the morning when I still have energy and willpower to do things like deep work, to do things like writing, before I engage with the hyperactive hive mind. So Austin is actually on the trajectory, potentially.
Well, okay. I mean, it sounds like to me, you're heading down the path towards changing your career situation. If that lifestyle sounds like either a greatly reconfigured job at your current employer or a different setup altogether that's maybe more freelance or contractor based. Is that a scary thought for you, or is that where you've led yourself already?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, exactly. You're spot on again. What is scary is I don't want to, in my attempt to escape the second control trap, I don't want to accidentally veer all the way to the first control trap, because it'd be easy to say, screw all this. I have enough money in the bank to last me, X many years. I'm just going to quit. I'm just going to say, screw Silicon Valley. I'm going to go to, Mexico and work on my book or whatever. But then I would be probably falling for the first control trap if I go so extreme.
Yep.
So the scary challenge is bridging the gap between like where I am right now and kind of this vision for when I'm 40 or when I'm 50.
Yeah. Well, okay. This is great. So in the first answer, I got to give some generic advice about deep to shallow ratios as a first step and lifestyle-centered career planning. Now we get an example of lifestyle-centered career planning. So I can give you a piece of advanced advice that goes to lifestyle-centered career planning implementation. And you're spot on about you don't want to fall back into the first control trap. You're not going to be happy if you say, I'm going to go to, rent a house in Cabo and just work on my book. That'll last a month before, you start to get antsy. So, what I'm always looking for in this situation is concrete exemplars. I'll often talk about the rule of 3. So you want to find a real person who has your background, who has a professional setup that resonates. Hey, that works. Okay, here's how they did it. Oh, they're a contractor that works on this type of ML project or whatever. Like it's concrete. This is someone, and it's a job that they do. It's a 6-month-a-year job. It's a flexible enough job. They take summers off. They go up to New England in the summer. So real people doing with your skill set what you want to do. Rule of 3 is if you want to be really secure, find 3 different people doing something like that. So now it's not a one-off. It's actually a viable path, but have a specific target that you're working backwards from. This guy, her, and him did this setup with my type of skill set. How do I move there? I mean, I will say I'm doing that in some of my own lifestyle-centric midlife career planning I've been doing. I don't share a lot of details about exactly what I'm thinking about because there's a lot of stakeholders involved, but this has been my approach. Is what I'm seeking is examples. I am seeking people with similar backgrounds who have already figured out a configuration that seems to work. That's how I think you can avoid the first career trap. I think you're there right now, the seeking stage. Go seek out these examples. Meet the people. Also, by the way, say, can I call you? Can I take you out for coffee if they're local? People are happy to share details of their experience and get concrete with them. How did you make this change? What are the hard parts? What advice do you have? I don't know if you ever talked, you probably didn't, but in that top performer course I did with Scott Young, we talked a lot about this journalistic approach to career development, where it's like
I know of that course, but I haven't taken it. No,
we have students actually go through this. It's like you're writing an article on how this specific type of job transition works. You're out there doing research, gathering real information, always concrete, always like this is something that people are actually doing. And I think you were ready to start looking for those exemplars, which is also an exciting part of the process because you get all the aspiration without actually having to yet do anything that's scary. So, good for you. I think you're in the fun part. But no reason why you can't start just trying to find people right now who come out of your background, who have a setup where they work 8 months a year, they work 6 months a year, they're location independent. I'm sure they're out there in your field. There might be an academic affiliation. There may be a nonprofit affiliation. Maybe they're a fellow at the OpenAI, whatever. And there's so many options out there for your field. I think you're ready to start looking for concrete examples.
This makes a lot of sense and really resonates. Yeah, you've mentioned this before, but I never, pieced it together. You're right. Yeah, that's what I need to do.
Excellent. Well, Spyros, keep me posted. I want to know what you end up
Yes.
doing. And maybe we'll follow up and we'll share that with the audience. But in the meantime, thanks for the case study. Thanks for the questions, and also an excuse for me to go through a lot of different advice. So I find that useful as well.
Yeah.
All right. So good luck for you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Cal and Jesse. Bye.